What does it mean to follow the call to gospel ministry? In this message, preached on the occasion of Zane, Garza, and Christian Saldana's licensing into the gospel ministry, listen in as Pastor Chris Chadwick explains from the Bible the call to pastor.
1 Timothy chapter 3 in your Bible tonight. If you know, these are called, 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus, are called the pastoral epistles. They're epistles that the Apostle Paul wrote to young pastors, two men. Timothy, I say young, Timothy was a young man, and he was pastor of the church at Ephesus. Titus was young, he was the pastor of the church at Crete. Timothy was about 40, and we believe Titus was somewhere between 35 and 40. So that's where the Bible defines young as. And so Christian and Zane, you're young. Now, church family, I'm preaching to all of us tonight, but I want to say, really, I'm preaching to these young men who feel called to ministry. That does not give you an escape to not listen. That just kind of lets you know where we're at tonight. That's what we're doing. Tonight's a great opportunity for our church to learn and grow, but also to encourage the ministry of Zane and Christian and Sarah and Callie as they desire to do an amazing work for the Lord. Now, the message I'm going to preach tonight is heavily influenced by one of the greatest preachers of the last 200 years, a man by the name of Charles Spurgeon. Charles Haddon Spurgeon was known as the Prince of Preachers in London at a time when Great Britain just had legendary preachers through it. And his preaching ministry lasted 37 years, and he wrote a book, and he wrote tons of books. He was one of the most published authors during the 1800s, mid to late 1800s. And though I will no way enter into the preaching capabilities he had, I would like to use some of his material to help us as a church family to understand what it means to have the call of the pastor on your life. And brothers, I want you to understand from the Bible what it means to have the call of the pastor on your life. There are, as we know, as a church family, many who have been called, but who have shirked or resisted that calling. They've had the call of God in their life, but they didn't want to do it for a variety of reasons. The hours are too long. That's probably true. The appreciation is often not there. That is at times maybe less true than we think, but it's true at times for people. I thank God for the encouragement of Canyon Ridge, but we ought to be more encouraging of one another, and so much the more as we see the day approaching. The time with family is not everything that we want. As Christian said, we probably don't make as much money as we could if we were in a different, quote, field. But there have been many who are called who have not gone. There are many who haven't been called, and I love what Spurgeon says here, but are trying to perform the calling in the flesh. And he says something like this: God pity the church that endures the ministry of one who is trying to prove his calling. That hundreds have missed their way and stumbled against a pulpit I love this, it's so British. That hundreds have missed their way and stumbled against a pulpit is sorrowfully evident from the fruitless ministries and decaying churches around us. It is a fearful calamity to a man to miss his calling, and to the church who he imposes himself. His mistake evokes an affliction of the most grievous kind. Now, I know you don't think that's as funny as I do, but man, that's a powerful statement. It's a fearful calamity to a man to miss his calling, and to the church who he imposes himself. His mistake involves an affliction of the most grievous kind. I will tell you, to the best of my ability, I believe that both Christian and Zane are called. Now, as a pastor, you're often asked, am I called? And when it's easily evident, like in Christian and Zane's life, that's an easy answer. It's also an easy answer when there's an easy no. Like, am I called? I don't see it. That's an easy answer. The hardest answer is the tweeners. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. That is a really, really challenging place to be as a pastor when somebody has asked you if they are called. I'm thankful tonight. We would not have brought Christian on if we did not believe, and if his previous pastor, Pastor Ryan Wrench, and his previous pastor, Pastor Bill Wrench, who's preached here many times, and Ryan's preached here as well, and Brother Bill has preached here many times. If they did not feel like Christian was called to ministry and to pastor, we wouldn't have brought him on. And if we didn't feel Zane was called to ministry, we'd have been like, dude, we love your wife, but move to Florida. There's an affliction that we don't want to endure if you're not legitimately called. But these young men join a long line of men who have committed their lives to the furtherance of the gospel and to the benefit of the church. And they have a commitment to the gospel, but a commitment to the gospel and the work of the ministry is not enough to be in the place of the pastor. So, Pastor, what is evidence of a call to ministry? We're going to look at these two chapters, 1 Timothy 3 and 2 Timothy chapter 2, because I think they help us and hopefully we'll be blessed by it. Brothers, number one, 1 Timothy chapter 3. We read the text earlier. You must meet the biblical qualifications of a pastor. You must meet the biblical qualifications of a pastor. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. Now, I know we read it earlier, but for the sake of you understanding the magnitude of this passage, let's read it again. And let's read it a little bit slowly and deliberately. This is a true saying, or it's accurate, it's right. If a man desires the office of a bishop or pastor, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober. Means serious-minded. Doesn't mean he doesn't have fun, but when it's time to be serious, dude knows how to be serious. Of good behavior, given to hospitality. He loves people. Apt to teach. Not given to wine. I know a good book if you have questions about that. No striker. Not greedy, a filthy lucre. Not in it, Christian, for the money. Patient. Oh, at times I get convicted of that one. Why that's in there, I have no idea. Patient. Not a brawler. Not covetous. One that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. I'm going to tell a little Christian and Sarah story. They don't know it's coming. They don't know anything that's coming tonight. We were with Christian and Sarah has kind of my personality. It's EMTJ or whatever it is on the Myers-Briggs test or the Merriam-Webster dictionary. I don't know what all those things are. My kids tell me to take these personality tests. But we have the same personality. And they were at our house, and after all the singles left from the Super Bowl, and we're talking, and man, she's just going, and I'm enjoying it because Judith and Natalie are my daughters, and I'm comfortable. I don't know where Judith and Natalie are. Natalie's around here. Oh, and Judith's in the back. Where's Natalie? Where's Natalie? Somebody's pointing. Natalie, wave your hand like you don't care. All right, do better. And so Judith and Allie are my daughters, and I just love it. We're all kind of hanging out. The Garzas are there. The Garza boys are giving no regard for Pastor's furniture. They are jumping on things, tearing stuff up. And I'm looking at Debbie, and Debbie's looking at me, and she goes, listen, you reap what you sow. And I was like, yeah, but that's our couch. And the boys are like have scissors, and they're like stabbing the couch and trying to stab each other. And no, I'm kidding about but they're just having a great time in the other room, and we're talking, just having a great time. And man, Sarah starts going, and she's a storyteller, and she's passionate. And I was like, how long is she gonna go? Like, how loud is she gonna get? It didn't really affect me. I was just intrigued from a sociological perspective. Like, she's a redhead. Is her hair gonna pop out of her head at some point? Like, what happens? Never been around her like this before. Totally serious. I'm just watching. It could have gone on for 3 days. I don't know. And then just with genteel leadership, Christian just reaches up and just touches her arm, never says a word, and just guides her back. And this was the thought that came to my mind when that happened. Because if you know me, you know I'm always watching everything, even when I act like I don't know that, but I think that I'm trying to watch stuff. And I just watched that, and I was so impressed, Christian, by that, because it just said to me, there's a well-ruling of your house. And Sarah, praise the name of the Lord, didn't look at him strangely, didn't act awkwardly. She just was kind of like, okay. And then Zane started going, and Callie reached up and grabbed his arm. One that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. Gravity. Doesn't mean the children don't have fun. But when dad says stop, they stop. And if they don't stop, dad has a longer, more intimate conversation with them. Why? Because if one know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? If you can't lead your family, you can't take care of the church of God. I don't mean this disrespectfully, but we've had missionaries come to our church, and their kids are like the 3rd, 4th, and 5th levels of Dante's Inferno. Now, I'm not being dishonest. And we didn't support them, those missionaries, not because we're trying to be harsh to missionaries' kids. It's a tough life. I was one. My dad was a missionary for a while. I understand the difficulty, but it was the utter lack of care that the parents gave to the discipline, correction, and help of the child. Parents, they're your responsibility. And we're going to be super patient with everyone. But somebody who is called to pastor, there is a requirement that we have. That's why we call these the pastoral requirements. Doesn't mean that kids won't have tough times. Both of my daughters are here. For those of you that have been here the entirety of their lives, you could point to difficult times that they've had and challenges that they have faced. But what it means is that dad and mom are working diligently to help those kids through those times of challenge and difficulty. They're not just letting them willy-nilly do whatever it is that they want. As a pastor at times, will have to lead a church through times of difficulty and challenge, and not just let the church do whatever it is that the church wants, but lead. Verse number 6, not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride he fall into the reproach and the condemnation of the devil. I should have read that right. Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them that are without, lest he fall into the reproach and the snare of the devil. And then he goes into the deacons being grave and the others. Brothers, you have a responsibility, as do I, to meet these qualifications. And when your life gets a little bit out of balance, you have a responsibility to adjust your life to these qualifications. Well, Pastor, I don't always want to be vigilant. I know, but you have to be. There are going to be times When people don't understand why you say, we're not going to do that. There's times when I'll say, no, we're not going to have that book in the bookstore. Well, but I really like this guy, somebody might say. Well, to be honest with you, it's not your decision. Because as the shepherd of the local church, I have a responsibility to be vigilant for what might come down the road. And a prudent man foresees the evil, and he hides and he protects himself, and he hides and he protects his family. The wise shepherd doesn't wait till the wolf gets into the fold of the sheep before he chases off the wolf. No, he wants to deal with that as far away from the sheep as he possibly can. And he's vigilant. And so he has some dogs that are around that kind of give warning when there's wolves around. You say, who are the dogs at Canyon Ridge? We call them trustees. We call I thought that would be funnier, but I'm like, oh, really? That's what they are? I go, that's why Bernie barks on the platform. He's warning us about something. But literally, that's what he's talking about here. He must have a biblical qualification. Number 2, look at verse number 2. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. Number 2, he must have an intense, all-consuming desire for the work of the ministry. An intense, all-consuming desire for the ministry. I was in Bible college. I think they called the pastor. You heard Leo's story tonight. And man, wasn't that awesome? I love that, man. When Leo called me, as soon as he called me, I was like, oh, this is so cool. Brought back so many memories because it's kind of the same thing for me, though it took me a little bit longer, but I wasn't in as good a church. And I'm teasing, but it took me a little bit longer. But I remember the call that God put on my life, and then hearing Christian and hearing Zane. I mean, it's just so similar, so many parallels. Well, October 8th, 1993, I surrendered to vocational ministry, to be a pastor. And about 2 weeks later, my friend Brian Patton and I, we were in school together, and Brian and I had went to Bible college, and then I was going to go back, and I had 2 thoughts. I was either going to go to business school when I got back to Spokane, and I was only going to Bible college for 1 semester, and just to kind of see Southern California, to have a new experience. And then I was going to go back to Spokane, and I was going to go to business school, or I was going to work really hard, and I was going to walk on either for the community college basketball team or Eastern Washington University. And I was pretty confident I would get a spot on the team. And so it was one of those 2 things. Well, God calls me into ministry, and I gave up both of those dreams, if you will. Like, I'm not going to play college basketball, and I'm not going to go to business school. God's called me to preach. And so I kind of gave those up. And 2 weeks later, Brian said, and so we played basketball whenever we could. And Brian said, hey, I know a church that has open gyms Sunday afternoon between services down in Whittier. You want to go with me? I said, I don't know where Whittier is, but I like the term gym and open, so let's go. So we got in this car and we drove down to this church in Whittier, California, and I don't even remember the name of the church. And we're playing and we're having a good time. It's kind of hot in there. It's one of those Santa Ana wind days in Whittier. If you know where Whittier is, it's warmer than it is here normally. And we're balling and we're having a good time. And I remember I stole the ball and I went down the court and I really, not bragging, I just had a really sweet dunk. And the pastor was playing with us. He was then about my age now, and he stopped the game, and he said, we don't see many people do that in our gym. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And he goes, what's your name? And so I said, my name's Chris Chadwick. And he had known my dad. He said, is that your dad? And I said, yeah, that's my dad. He goes, great, how's your dad? So we talked. I mean, the pastor stopped the game. When the pastor stops the game, everybody just stops. And so pastor's got the ball. He's a point guard because every pastor thinks he knows how to play, including me. And he stops the game, and we're talking, and then he goes, so what's God called you to do in your life? And he was super gracious and kind. It was such an example to me. And I said, oh, well, God just called me to pastor, so that's what I'm going to do. And he looked at me with this intensity. Like he didn't seem like an intense dude. But he looked at me with an intensity, and he said, Chris, if you can do anything other than pastor, please go do that. And I was like, okay, all right, check. And we went back to playing. It was that much. But I never forgot that. If I could do anything other than pastor and be happy, I should do that. If a man can be content, said Spurgeon, doing something other than ministry, he is probably not called to be a pastor. The desire should not be a sudden emotional response to a sermon or a presentation of a great need, though God uses that as a catalyst to awaken inside us a calling. Rather, a man should carefully count the cost before responding to a potential call. You heard Zane, Pastor, I feel called to ministry. All right, let's pump the brakes a little bit and see if this is really a calling, or if you just like youth pastors. Or if you just like youth camp. Brothers, it has to be an all-consuming desire to do the work of the ministry. The prospective preacher should feel a fire in his bones, a holy compulsion to spend the rest of his life declaring the gospel and the glory and the goodness of God and his goodness to people and to his church. It has to be all-consuming. Well, I could do ministry, or maybe I could do this, or maybe I could do that. Probably not a call to ministry. Number 3, you see this in verse number 2. I'm going quick. Vigilant, of good behavior, given to hospitality, and in these last 3 words, apt to teach. He has to have some ability to teach and some ability to lead. A pastor has to have some ability to teach and some ability to, it's a requirement. Apt to teach. The word apt means skilled in teaching. One of the reasons you see young men teaching around Canyon Ridge, and you've seen Zane do it a lot. Christian's been here 3 months. You'll start seeing him in the pulpit a little more. He's preached some, and you'll see that a little more. One of the reasons is we want these young men teaching is to help them refine their teaching abilities and their teaching skills. When they preach, there is often, not always, but often a review process that happens afterwards where we'll sit in a room with me and Bernie and Charlie, sometimes even John Scheifus, and we'll review their presentation, we'll review what they said, we'll review the content. I mean, we don't take them through a crucible. We're not trying to be harsh or hurtful. We're just trying to help them develop that skill of preaching and teaching. Why? Because it's a requirement. There's no requirement, if you were to read verses 8 to 13, there's no requirement for aptitude for teaching for a deacon. But this requirement to teach is there because Timothy, in so many ways, is at Ephesus, and he is the primary preacher-teacher. And he has to communicate to people, and then there are people running up saying, I feel called to ministry. Well, bro, I don't mean to be rude, but when I listen to you teach, I feel like gouging my eyes out just so that I could call an ambulance and go home. Every once in a while in a CrossFit workout, Christian's been doing CrossFit now for 3 months. By the way, he set some PRs this last week. I was super excited for him. Super excited for him. That was great. You should have clapped because a PR is really huge. PR means personal record. That's really huge. And sometimes when you're in a really, really hard CrossFit workout, we had one of the hardest workouts we've had. For me, it just doesn't fit my body type. If you know what a thruster is a front squat where you push it up overhead into a push press. And so you come up out of the front squat, and as you're coming up out of it, you're pushing it out. Well, I've been sick the whole month of January. Still got some of the drainage, the postnasal drip and all of that going on. And on Wednesday, the workout was 5 thrusters at 95 pounds. Not a heavy thruster at all, but 5 thrusters at 95 pounds. Every minute on the minute. So at the start of every minute, you do 5 thrusters, and then you have to row the rest of the minute on a rowing machine. And both of those compress your lungs. And the goal was at least 1,500 meters on the rower. I hate thrusters. They're my worst lift ever. But if I have to do them, I want to do them a little bit heavier so that they bring the bar down closer to my shoulders so that it'll rest on my shoulders and I can do it a little easier. 95 pounds, the worst weight for thrusters for me that there is. Or the bar would be, anything lighter than that would be terrible. Well, we're doing that, and we're about halfway through the 10-minute workout that was the most difficult workout of the week, and the next day we did a 30-minute workout, and that wasn't near as hard as the 10-minute workout. And at about the 5-minute mark, I began to imagine spraining my ankle, dropping the weight on my head, breaking my arm, just so I could quit doing the workout and go breathe for once. Zane Garza's over there. He's like, "What's up, Pastor?" He was like, Denise Austin, wearing a leotard, leg warmers. "You can do it, Pastor. You can do it." I mean, it's like, what are you? Just that's Zane over there. He's like, "Come on, everybody." And he starts singing 70s songs to me. And I just wanted to throw something at him. And then I wanted to throw something at myself. And because I wanted to quit. I wanted to give in. I wanted not to have to do that. Well, the reality is that in ministry we're going to face times like this, and brothers, we have to be able to work through this even in the difficult times of struggle, of being out of season, and we have to challenge ourselves to be all that God wants us to be. We see this as well in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse number 24, where the Bible says, "And the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men, apt to teach," skilled in teaching. But a pastor doesn't only have the skill to teach, he has to lead. If you look early on in verse number 1, this is a true saying: if a man desires the office of a bishop, the word bishop is the care and oversight of a church. It's not enough to be able to open the word and deliver it. There's a necessity for you to be able to lead the church forward for the cause of Christ in a productive way. Most people see the pulpit ministry as the main ministry, but if I could be candid with you, I find that the main ministry of the church is the leadership aspect of the ministry. No doubt, the preaching of the word is the most important part, but that part that keeps the church. And there's a confliction even in my own soul of how to say this, but that keeps a church pressing on and committed to the end state and walking in unity and joy is the responsibility of the bishop. The bishop literally means to have the care and oversight of a Christian church. That's why these brothers are learning about church finances. That's why their pastor talks to them about decision making. That's why you'll often see them down here with me in the front row, and I'm coaching them through why I'm making the decisions that I'm making. Am I the beginning and ending of those decisions? Absolutely not. Do other people do it better? Absolutely. Do other people do it different? Absolutely. But I at least want to inspire a seed of desire inside of them to learn how to be a bishop, how to care for the oversight of the church. It's not enough to say to Sarah, "You figure out the nursery, I got other stuff to do." No, because you're going to stand before God for the nursery. And sometimes you give a lot and then you have to start taking back some authority. And by the way, let me just edify our church for a minute. If you're in a leadership position of that ministry, you don't own that ministry. There's still a shepherd and a bishop over that ministry. Well, I would do it different if I was in charge. Well, maybe one of these days God will make you the bishop. But until that point, you have a responsibility to do what the pastors ask you to do. Hebrews chapter 13. Not being rude. That's just what God expects of a local New Testament church, and things to be done decently and in order. And as a bishop, we communicate and we teach and we lead and we help people. to become all that God wants them to be. Number 4, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse number 2. Like we're like seconds away. A couple hundred of them, but seconds away. And the things that thou hast heard of me among 2, verse number 2. Let's go with 1. Thou therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. Timothy was having a difficult time. He was a little bit emotional at times. And Paul is helping him. And Paul is an encouragement to him. And Paul says to him, the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. Brothers, there has to be fruit in your ministry. It's not enough to know how to preach. It's not even enough to know how to lead. If there's no fruit in your ministry, probably evident that you're not called to ministry. God have mercy on the church who has a pastor who's not passionate to reach the lost with the gospel of Jesus Christ. John chapter 15, verse number 15, Jesus is talking. He says, henceforth I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doeth. But I've called you friends, for all things I've heard of my Father I've made known unto you. You've not chosen me, but I have chosen you, and ordained you that you should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit should remain. And whatsoever you shall ask of the Father in my name, he may give it you. There needs to be fruit in your ministry. The conversion of souls provides a seal, said Charles Spurgeon, to a man's ministry. The world would never label a man to be a fisherman who never catches fish. A soldier, if he never fights. A firefighter who doesn't quench fires. How can a man who is commissioned by God for the gospel ministry bring no one to God? If you go to a fire station and you say, hey, there's a fire over there. And everybody in the station is like, yeah, we see that too. Hey, George, you got those marshmallows? There's a fire. You'd be like, they're not firefighters. I was on a ride-along a couple weeks ago, and we were down in PB, 700 Grand, right there by Fire Station 21, the PB fire station. It's like, to me, it's like one of the cooler fire stations just because of its location. And I love being there. And we were there, and there's a lifeguard station there, and the cops use the restroom there. And so we were using the restroom, and we came out of the restroom. Ralph, I was with your brother that night. We came out of the restroom, and I looked north, and there was a fire on the beach, like up against the seawall. There's not allowed to be fires there. It was just, somebody had just lit it. So I said to Danny, I'm like, hey, there's a fire over there. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but you see it. And he's like, oh, chaps, we got to handle that. So we made a call to fire, and we walked down there, and we're just kind of standing around. And to be honest with you, it was cold that night. And Dane and I was loving that fire. I was like, man, I hope fire doesn't come. I don't want fire to come, because we had to stand there till the fire came out, and I was hoping they had like some major call to be on and that we'd have to stay there, because sometimes when you're on a ride-along, you get stuck on a call for like 45 minutes, and I was like, let this be a 45-minute call, because it was cold outside, and we're standing there by the fire, and we're just kind of, I mean, you know the feeling, you're just kind of warming your hands up, and we'd been outside all night at Night Beach Team. It's about 1 a.m., and we're just kind of warming ourselves up right there and having a good conversation with Danny Gomez and Chris Beck, and we're just kind of hanging out. And man, about 5 minutes later, fire came. And the captain comes. He's kind of like the sergeant on a police force. He's in charge of the rig or fire truck, and he comes over. He says, so what do we have? Just a little fire. Y'all don't need to worry about it. If you got somewhere else to go, feel free. He goes, no, we got to put it out. We tried to put it out with like fire extinguishers, but yeah, I'll tell you what, you put a fire extinguisher in a young cop's hands and bad things happen. They're like, hey, chaps, does it work? And so they tried to put it out, it didn't work out, so we're just standing there. And by now, there's like, because it's late, there's nothing to do, there's like 5 cops there and a fire truck. You would have thought we worked for Caltrans. So we're having a great time, and fire comes, and they're just kind of, we're laughing with the captain and just having it. I mean, literally, it's just having a fun time because we work well with those guys and have a good relationship with them. They're awesome. And so they're like, hey, we're going to send somebody down to put this fire out. And they got some young rookies. Well, I got a little bit excited. I said, you're going to put the fire out? They're like, yeah. And so I said, can I do it? And they said, do you know how? I said, it doesn't seem that hard. Hose, water, valve. I feel like I could probably do this. And the captain goes, sure, chaps, you can do whatever you want. Yes. And could you call my wife and tell her that? That's exactly what I said. And so they handed me the hose, and about 4 guys were back there, and I got the hose, and I'm putting the fire out, and I'm into it. And they're like, chaps, you are really into this. And I looked at them like, you guys ever put out a fire? And they're like, no. I'm like, right, I'm into this. Man, I love this. This is great. This is exciting. I want to be a part of this. And we had a great time, and I put it out. Now listen, I put the fire out. But those rookies didn't trust me. So they walked down on the beach, and they got their big firefighter boots on, and they got their big firefighter hooks. And this was their level of passion. They're kicking everything around, and they soak that fire. I said, I got the fire. I literally said to the captain, how much more water can you put? It's like 1/3 of a pallet. He goes, we put it out till we know it won't start again. Now, here's the parallel. There was a passion that they had to do their job. Brothers, you have to have a passion to reach the lost. There's going to be 1,000 distractions in your world. 1,000 opportunities to go different directions. There will be times of barrenness and dry seasons. However, barrenness and a dry season of effective evangelism should not produce complacency or apathy. Rather, it should stoke a greater passion in the preacher's heart to see souls saved and lives changed by the gospel, and drive you to your knees in prayer and on your feet in your community, passing out tracts, inviting people to church, sending text messages, following up, sending emails, whatever it takes to see the gospel shared and people reached. Finally, other godly men and women in the church should recognize the call of God on your life. A subjective feeling is not enough. Acts chapter 13, I preached on it a couple of weeks ago, so we won't deal with it. But a man's intense calling must be confirmed by external affirmation of God's people. A wise man will not be slow to set aside the counsel or concern of the church, especially the counsel of other men of God, other pastors, other leaders in his church. I believe this with all of my heart. Talked about it a little bit just a moment ago. On Thursday, Christian, I sent Pastor Ryan a text. He's in the Philippines, so I didn't call him. And I sent him a text, and I said, when did you notice the call of God on Christian's life? And he said this, I always knew he had a heart for God. When he was in high school, he talked about his call to preach, and I just wanted to encourage that. I gave him some leadership positions, which he embraced. This is a direct quote. Even during times when he struggled, he would relate to his call to preach and took the weight of his calling very seriously. I love this phrase. I always knew he had a heart for the Lord. He knew it before you knew it. I still remember the day I'm discipling Zane Garza. Zane comes in after that youth camp experience that he talks about a couple of weeks later, and he sits down on my couch. The couch that's in the green room now, sits in the center section, and I'll never forget it. Everything about decorum is now out the window. And we're getting ready for discipleship, and I said, so you got any questions or anything? He said, well, no, I don't have any questions. He said, but I just want to let you know that I feel God's call to be in ministry and to work with teens. And then he said this, so I don't know what we're going to do, but can we move Bernie out of the youth group? Well, what he didn't know is we had been praying for Zane and Callie to feel a call to ministry. And when he said he had a call to ministry in his life, no lie, my exact words, he didn't say it tonight, my exact words to him were, finally. He goes, what? Well, Debbie and I had recognized the call to ministry long before he recognized his call to ministry. We're like, is this guy ever going to surrender to the Lord? Bernie and I talked about Zane for, I don't know, months, if not years. Like, is he ever going to submit to the call of God on his life? Here's what I'm saying. A call to ministry is going to be recognized by other folks in the church. Other folks in the church. Other godly men and women. Well, tonight we're going to end the service a little bit differently. We're going to pray, and then I'm going to ask Brother Burns to come and help me with the service and John, and we're going to make some presentations that are time-honored traditions.
Thank you for listening. Hear more messages anytime at canyonridgebaptist.com. If you're in the San Diego area, please join us for a service. We meet on Sundays at 8:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m., and 5 o'clock p.m. We look forward to seeing you.